This is an African reaction. Today I'm going to be reacting to another video from Weebo Union. Without wasting time, let's dive right back into it. Let's go.
And welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be doing a recap over the last updates of the past week from May 26th to today. So starting out in the Bakhmut front, we see that on the 26th of May, the Russian forces managed to push the Ukrainians out of the outskirts of the city and fully capture the western parts here to the west of Bakhmut. The Ukrainians had already left Khomove and the southern Dacha area, and the only reason the Russians haven't advanced further than this was because the Wagner PMC was rotating out at this point. Then we also see the Russian forces managed to recapture parts of the southern front of the flank of the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, and they also managed to push back the Ukrainian forces on the northern flank of Bakhmut. Then we see at the Bilorivka area that the Russian forces managed to capture this field area and forest patches to the northeast of the village of Bilorivka. And in the Spirne area, the Russian forces also managed to capture this part right here, the gray zone, while the white area was captured later. Then we see from a news report that the Russian forces started sending T-90Ms to the front line, most likely heading to the Svetovo-Kreminna area, where the two Russian armored divisions are located. And I say this because we've seen a lot of T-90Ms being sent to the Svetovo-Kreminna area, where they have been engaging in combat with the Ukrainian forces. So something very interesting from these updates is that the Russian forces started attacking in the Bilorivka area and capturing some territory, as well as in the Spirne area and here to the west and north and south of Bakhmut. So what is interesting about this is that they have one thing in common, and that is that the Chechen forces started arriving in these areas. So the Chechen forces fighting in Bilorivka, Spirne and in the Bakhmut flanks, as well as to the west of the city. And this is very interesting because the Russian Ministry of Defense has now repeatedly said that the Chechen forces are being sent to the front line. Kadyrov, who is the Chechen leader, has said that he has been given a mission to capture all of the Donbass region. So this is very interesting because in my eyes, the Chechens don't have the necessary forces for such an operation, but most likely they will be supported by the Russian forces. Moving on to the following day, we see that the Russian forces managed to attack and capture parts here to the southwest of Meshutivka, where they on the 27th of May managed to capture the forest patches to the south of the village, as well as the river line by the Oskil River. As well as in the north flank of the Bakhmut area, the Ukrainian forces managed to capture parts here to the north of Oryho-Vasilivka in the direction of the E40 highway. So this is a continuous attempt by the Ukrainian forces to capture further territories by the E40 highway, where they'll attempt to advance further on, as that is the main point in the northern flank, as there's no villages, there's no main defensive positions by the E40 highway, and if they manage to advance in this area, they'll be able to cut off not only Selesnyansk to the north, but also Dubovo-Vasilivka to the south. So this is a very interesting point of contact. And the Ukrainian forces most likely continue attempts at capturing parts of the E40 highway for such an operation. Then we see here to the northern parts that generally on the whole front line, that the Ukrainian forces significantly started increasing their shelling, especially around the front line in the Zaporizhzhia front right here. And that is very interesting because that happened on the 28th of May. So around the Zaporizhzhia front, heavily shelling started increasing. And that could be a factor that could lead to the operation, the offensive, the summer offensive happening in this area. And something else that happened in this past week is that I made two videos on the summer offensive, one from the Russian and one from the Ukrainian perspective. And in those, I call it a summer offensive, not a spring offensive. And a lot of comments kept telling me spring ends in the 22nd of June. However, that is not true in Ukraine. Ukrainian weather turns into summer weather starting already in late May. And we have seen in the late May, there's been a lot of rain, there's been a lot of sun, there's been a lot of heat. The temperature has generally passed to 20 degrees Celsius. which is an indication of the summer weather in Ukraine, both a lot of sun and a lot of rain. As well as specifically in Ukraine, they follow the calendar for the seasons, so they claim that the 1st of June is summer and it ends on the 31st of August. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, Turkey had the second part of the election, the presidential election, and Erdogan won the re-election, and he is now entering a third term as the president of Turkey. This is very significant for this battle because while Erdogan is more a neutral guy in this conflict, he's acting diplomatically, mediating talks between Ukraine and Russia, especially the grain deal, but also while they're sending weapons to Ukraine, they're only doing it in a very modest degree. In comparison, his competitor was more Western-leaning to the point where he was talking about sending a lot more weapons to Ukraine and adding a lot more support for Ukraine. So this has continued a stalemate where Turkey is trying to play both sides in this conflict. Then we move on to the southern flank of Bakhmut again, where the Ukrainian forces managed to recapture parts here to the south of the front line, and they've managed to capture these two forest patches. And something very interesting is that the area around Bakhmut has actually increased significantly in the quality of the satellite images. This is a recent update by Google Maps. We can also see the 2023 copyright mark, and the quality has significantly increased, although it is not up to date. These are satellite images from around April or May. We can tell based on Mariupol, where we see the damages by the Azovstal plant. So this is after fighting has reached Azovstal, but before fighting has reached Bakhmut, because we do not see any signs of fighting in Bakhmut. And at the same time, we don't see it either on the Lysychansk and Severodonetsk areas. However, there's no indication that the quality of these pictures has increased. So it's really not clear when these pictures were taken, when these satellite images were taken. However, they were taken prior to fighting reaching Bakhmut, which would indicate somewhere before August. Following all of this, the Wagner PMC had finally fully redeployed and withdrawn from Ukraine, where they entered training centers in Russia, where they are training new recruits and holding a break after the continuous assaults and fighting in Bakhmut. Then we move on to the Serebyansky forest area to the south of Kreminna, where the Russian forces managed to advance slightly by the rivers here to the south and to the northwest of Bilovarivka, and they have since started attacking in every direction from this point, as well as to the northwest by the Kharkiv front, where the Ukrainian forces were pushed back and the Russian forces managed to capture these forest areas here to the south of Liman Pershi. As for the Spirina area, we see that the Russian forces managed to capture this white part. The white part hasn't updated, but essentially it is matching the borders to the gray part, and they managed to capture and enter the village of Spirina, capturing the first few buildings within the village. As for the Marinka area to the west of Donetsk, the Russian forces managed to capture parts of the northern part of Marinka. And this is very interesting because both Marinka and Spirina, as well as the Serebyansky forest area, have different units in them. Marinka mainly consists of DPR soldiers, but there's also some Chechen forces there. As well as by Spirina, it is mainly Chechen forces with a few LPR forces. And finally, the Serebyansky forest area consists of Russian soldiers only. So there are three different units attacking in these three different areas. And then finally, according to Russia's defense ministry, Chechen Akhmat Special Forces launching an offensive in Marinka. So generally, we're seeing a lot of forces being moved to the front lines, a lot of reinforcements all across the front line, and a lot more offensive operations by the Russian forces across the front line. However, these are all very small in scale. There's no significant buildups, there's no significant attacks. This may be an indication that the Russian forces have given the initiative to Ukraine, expecting them to launch an offensive, and then Russia will respond with a counter-offensive. And that is all I have for this.
That was a great analysis. So basically, this was a weekly analysis of everything that went from, I think, the 27th to the, I think, the 1st of May. And that's all. This was an African reaction. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope to see you on my channel next time. Thank you. Have a blessed day. Bye.